Okay. Good morning, all. Wait. I need to speak Indonesia first. Selamat pagi semuanya. Terima kasih buat kehadirannya. Selamat datang di diskusi Filsafat 101-nya Sekolah kembali. Dan kami hari ini kita akan berbincang soal epistemologi agama dan juga epistemologi reform. Dua isu topik yang sangat menarik. Dan hari ini kita mengundang Tyler. So welcome Tyler, and thank you so much for taking your time to give a talk here. Maybe I'll give a picture a bit about what is actually Skole, and I'll introduce you. Okay, Tyler? Okay, so Skole ID is a philosophy hub which has a concern for providing an accessible philosophy talks for laymen and philosophy enthusiasts. We organize weekly philosophy courses, daily articles, weekly discussions for free and hope to increase public criticism. We invite global and local philosophers to our weekly discussions, and some of the names which probably some of you already joined the discussions: William Lane Craig, Graham Opie, Philip Goff, and also scholars from Indonesia, Herdo Sandi, Yuji Nagasawa, and others scholars. And we are the first philosophy hub in Indonesia who have the initiative to invite global philosophers to talk for Indonesian audiences, because we acknowledge that it is important for us to have a broader understanding and global connection with philosophers around the globe to make us, whether you are in academia or not, be aware of the progress, issues, topics which currently discussed by the global community of philosophers. So yeah, that's what we try to do in Scholar ID, and I'm Samuel. I'm right now a graduate student in philosophy at Universitas of Indonesia, University of Indonesia in Jakarta, in Depok. And right now here we already have Tyler with us. Tyler is an associate professor of philosophy at the University of St. Joseph, Macau, and previously he also held an assistant professor position at Houston Baptist University, and also a postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Macau. And Tyler's research interest is primarily in philosophy of religion, epistemology, comparative philosophy, and analytic theology. He already authored books, and some of them are Religious Epistemology, published by Cambridge Press in 2018, and also Plantingian Religious Epistemology and World Religions, published by Lexington Books in also 2018. And I already read those two books, Tyler, and I really enjoyed the first one. Yeah, I think it's really helpful to give me a big picture of what is religious epistemology and reform epistemology. And so once again, thank you so much for taking your time to give a talk here, Tyler.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for the kind introduction and the kind remarks about that volume. It's great to be here, and too bad, like I said, I'm not in the university, and I'm not in Macau right now, because this might be a little later in the day for some of you. So it's very kind of you, everyone who woke up this morning and thought, I'm going to listen to philosophy this morning. So.
Yeah, I think it's I really appreciate these folks here. Yeah, 8 in the morning and listening to religious epistemology and reform epistemology. Yeah. Also, I have some friends here who also take graduate studies in theology and anthropology, and I think maybe they want to ask you some questions later.
Okay, sounds great.
So Tyler, before we talk about your religious epistemology and reform epistemology, we always ask this question to every philosopher who come here. So first, I wonder what philosophy is for you, and also how could you be first introduced to philosophy?
Right, thanks for that. Yeah, so whenever I start teaching philosophy to students who have never had a philosophy course before, right? You can get a big misconception about what philosophy is. Sometimes, when you tell someone, oh, I'm a philosopher, right? They might respond back by saying, oh, well, what's your philosophy? Or, do you have any wise quotes for us? Can you, expecting that you have some great wisdom to share with them. So I take it that philosophy is just thinking really, really, really hard about what exists and how we know that it exists. I take it that whenever you're thinking really, really hard about what exists and how we know that things exist, then you're doing philosophy. So I think that's kind of a good understanding, at least a rough understanding of what philosophy is, without, of course, getting into what metaphysics is, epistemology, philosophy of mind, political philosophy, various other traditions and subdisciplines and so forth. Philosophy of cognitive science or logic, etc. Philosophy of physics. You can just keep naming them on and on. I'll take that. I guess that'll be my response. And then, how did I get into philosophy, right? That was the other question.
Yeah.
So when I was in high school, a senior in high school, the year before college, at least how that goes in America, it's what we call it, 12th grade. I started to have questions about my faith and started to question whether or not God existed and if God didn't exist, if there was meaning to life. And I came down on the no side, no objective meaning. And I thought it'd be really hard to understand moral duties if God didn't exist. So I was like, no, probably not. So I was kind of going for this more nihilistic or quasi-nihilistic approach to life. And then I had a religious experience through reading Old Testament passages that I took to be talking about Jesus, such as Isaiah 53. And, I was in the car going to school one day, and I thought, well, from reading those passages, I'm pretty sure that, I can find myself believing that this is God's word and that Jesus is the Messiah. But is Jesus really God? All right. And I pulled over in a parking lot at Starbucks, and I thought, I'm late. Well, so what? I'll be 30 more minutes late, Don't tell my old teachers this, but and then I just kind of opened the Bible and prayed. And I kind of committed the unpardonable sin that Christians often commit, namely, God, whatever you want to tell me, show me, right? And here's a Bible. Randomly, point. And it was a passage that I found myself believing that this was Jesus is God, and Jesus is controlling the weather, and even the seas obey him. And Peter's like, what in the world? Who is this? Right. And I found myself believing, well, this is God. This is God in the flesh. And I closed my Bible, and I had this crazy experience where I felt so certain that God existed, so certain that Christianity was true, so certain that God loved me. And I just felt so much joy in my heart, and just wanted to praise God, and started coming home every day from school. And like, first thing I do is like read my Bible, check MySpace. That dates me. Check MySpace and read my Bible, right? And so that kind of got into Christianity, being serious about it this way. Well, fast forward, I ended up getting really big into apologetics. So I ended up going my first year doing an undergrad in biblical studies. And I went to a school that was hardcore into like liberation theology and Jesus seminar and that sort of thing. And so I was like, well, coming from kind of a skeptical background, I was very keen on doing research about all these things and trying to find good responses. And my teachers hated me. So fast forward even a little bit more, about a year later, I started doing street evangelism with someone, and they introduced to me a philosopher who did Christian philosophy. And I started listening to lectures, couldn't get enough, thought it was really great. However, I had a really, really bad epistemology. I thought that in order to know that P, I had to be certain that P. It had to be such that I couldn't be wrong about P, right? And so that would stress you out, if you think that's what you need for knowledge, then any possible tiny little hole, right, that's there could overwhelm you and show that you actually don't know anything or don't know that God exists. And I just was overwhelmed with this worry that if I ran into a philosopher, they could show me that my arguments for God were bad. And then if that was the case, and I couldn't show them that it was impossible that Christianity was false, then I was, I was going to like waste my whole life. And I was just really afraid of this random philosophy professor that I would encounter. Now, I wasn't obviously doing philosophy then, but that was my fear. My fear was I'd run into a philosophy professor, they'd destroy my worldview, show that I knew that I didn't know that God existed, and my whole faith would be in vain. And so I got into Alvin Plantinga's work. I ended up going to grad school, do a philosophy, MA in philosophy of religion, and I read Alvin Plantinga's Warranted Christian Belief. And when I read it, I was like, wow, we don't have to have arguments to know that God exists. We don't have to have arguments to know lots of things are true, not just God's existence, but lots of things. And I could trust my experiences, my religious experiences that I've had. I could trust. And so, once that happened, my sort of constant worries evaporated. They disintegrated. They went away. And I was just definitely like, I'm going to spend the rest of my academic career, defending this guy's work because I like it a lot. And so, hence, this is where I am today now. Some books and articles later, so that's that story.
Okay, nice. Thank you, Tyler. Maybe I give some follow-up questions or maybe a response regarding your definition of what is philosophy. Can I say maybe that if we're saying that philosophy is like thinking hard about something, maybe we could say that in the broader sense, actually everyone is a philosopher. The question is whether you're a good one or not one. Yeah. Can I say like that, Tyler?
Exactly. Yeah. Everyone's got a philosophy. Everyone's got a worldview. Everyone has a metaphysics and epistemology and ethics, right? It might not be really well thought out. It might be inconsistent. There might be contradictions everywhere. You might not even explicitly understand your own views in a technical way, but it's there. So I absolutely, everyone's a philosopher. The question is, are you going to at least try to be decent at it? Do a little bit of practice with it. Think a little hard about trying to sort of improve it.
Yeah. And regarding your story, I actually have some kind of background. I introduced to apologetics in my 12th grade in high school, and I end up right now as a graduate student in philosophy.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. Thank you for sharing this. Maybe I want to go further to your research interest in religious epistemology, Tyler.
Sure.
So it is your research interest, and I wonder, could you share about those topics? Why religious epistemology, and what are they?
Right. Yeah. So if you can imagine, some of the interest came because of my existential crisis that I had, right? Because I wanted to know if I needed arguments and needed to be certain and so forth about God's existence. And so my first worries were to do with religion and God. And only sort of second worries that started, whatever surface, or second concerns, they were more like mainstream epistemology concerns. But I think that's interesting too, right? I think that's a lot of people are like that. Philosophy of religion is actually a really popular topic with the broader public. When I tell people that I think about God's existence and whether I can know He exists and so forth, that sounds a lot more interesting than like whether or not there are such things as holes or something. So I do think that philosophers, even atheist philosophers, should probably hit on how interesting philosophy of religion is to the average person. I think we could get more students that way. But yeah, so I take it that religious epistemology, right, is so let's break down epistemology. Epistemology, I mean, formally is the study of knowledge or whatnot, but more precisely, it's the study of epistemic concepts like justification, warrant, rationality, right? What is knowledge? So a religious belief is kind of just applying these epistemic concepts to religious belief and practice. So is my religious belief justified or warranted? Am I rational in holding that Jesus rose from the dead? Do I know Catholicism is true? Or I'm a Catholic, so I'll show you my card, my cards up front. If you couldn't guess by the university I teach at, so that's what I take to be roughly what a religious epistemology is. I just continue to be interested in it because of where I came from and what I found to be the most interesting.
I quite agree with you. Yeah, I really agree with you that philosophy of religion is one of the most interesting topics in philosophy. Like maybe someone will get bored if we're talking too much about why chair exists or why table exists. And yeah, that's what make religion as a phenomena which everyone actually have. Whether they right now on atheist or not, but somehow they probably have any experience with religiosity.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to the next questions, Tyler. So, we will talk about reform epistemology here, but as we know, or some of the participants here do not know, but we know that I could say that reform epistemology is just like applying proper functionalism to religious belief, if I'm not wrong. So can you share that ideas of proper functionalism as externalist conception of justification?
Right. Yeah. And thanks for that question. So I take it that reformed epistemology is sort of a thesis, right? I think it's a thesis that religious belief can be justified or warranted apart from argumentation, right? And there are different theories about justification or different theories about warrant. They can still get you to the same spot. They can argue for that thesis, right? My favorite way, and I think the most plausible way, is to talk about, proper functionalism. It might be important here to make a distinction between justification, at least how I usually talk about it, and warrant, right? I've thrown these terms around already a few times, and some people listening might be thinking they're the same thing, or might be thinking they have no idea what either of these terms mean, right? So justification, I take it, is I think the correct way to think about justification is in reference to sort of deontology. Are you within your epistemic rights, right? Have you done your epistemic duties with respect to believing that P? So in this case, have you done your epistemic duty about, I don't know, let's say whether or not you think Kanye West's Donda album is going to come out today, right? And so you might just say, oh, I just believe it, or I flip a coin, right? And if it landed on heads, I was going to say that Donda came out today, and if it landed on tails, I was going to say that it doesn't, right? And then you might think, well, you're not really justified in believing that, right? You're not within your right in affirming the proposition that Donda is going to come out today. You just believed something based off of, or you at least assented to the proposition or put your will toward it, just because, a flip of a coin, right? That's your belief is defective. And so that's what I mean by justification. If something is, the question is like, here is my phone, right? My phone is blue, if you can't tell, or the covering is, and the phone is. And if you were to ask me, like, why do I think it's blue? I would say, well, it just really seems to me that it's blue. I'm being appeared to very bluely, right? And, so I'm within my right in believing that this phone is blue, right? I have a strong experience that produces in me, right, the belief that this is blue. And I don't have any defeaters for thinking that, that this is blue. So I'm justified. I'm within my right in affirming that this here is blue. So what I just articulated here is actually an epistemic theory called phenomenal conservatism. So it's basically kind of like everything is innocent until proven guilty, right? If something appears to you that way, you have at least at first, prima facie justification for believing it, unless you have a defeater for it. You at least have some justification. So that's how I understand justification. How I'm going to understand warrant. Warrant is the ingredient that turns true belief into knowledge. The ingredient that turns true belief into knowledge. So, I can have true belief. Let's say I believe from Houston, Texas. So I'm a Rockets fan. Rockets were like the worst team in the league, sadly, last year after they traded James Harden. Very, very sad times. Very, very sad times. Let's all of a sudden say that, let's say they didn't even draft Jalen Green, right? Let's say that they didn't get any better players. They didn't improve. And all of a sudden, I was like, yeah, the Rockets, they're going to go 82-0. They're going to win every single game, break NBA records, and win the championship. And you said, oh, okay, sure. And let's now go ahead and say some time passed, and it turns out to be true. Few people would think that I actually possessed knowledge prior to the Rockets playing, that the Rockets were going to go 82-0, right? So I can have true belief, but not have knowledge. And so think of like knowledge as, some sort of substance, and luck is the mortal enemy of knowledge. Luck dissolves. Luck is like acid, and it totally dissolves knowledge. And so if you have enough luck in the situation, it can't be said that you know the proposition in question. So warrant is kind of like the ingredient that, you have some true belief, right? You throw some ingredients on it, you throw true belief, warrant on it, true belief blossoms and turns into knowledge. Right? So that's what warrant is. Well, this is like a really cool ingredient, right? I want to make sure all of my beliefs have warrant. Well, here's a theory of warrant that Alvin Plantinga defends, and my volumes and work and so forth. I've picked up the mantle and tried to do a little small part in defending his views. So he advocates. I'm going to kind of tell you a very technical account of warrant, of proper functionalism, and then I'm going to try to break it down a little bit. So for Plantinga, a proposition P has warrant if and only if P is the product of properly functioning cognitive faculties, with the cognitive faculties and the environment for which they were designed, the cognitive faculties having a design plan that is aimed at truth, and the design plan is actually a good one, where there's a high statistical probability that the belief being produced under such conditions will be true. So, that's proper functionalism in a very technical account. And are you still there? Because you're frozen. Is anyone still there? Oh, okay. I think.
Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. I was worried. I was like, am I talking to myself? Oh no.
I'm sorry.
I do that anyway. What else is new? So that's the technical version. So let's think a little bit deeper about what proper functionalism is. In cognitive science, the paradigm view, at least traditionally, is that the mind is a computer, right? Maybe you don't buy into that, but maybe you think that at least our minds are part computer, or at least something like a computer, right? What do computers have? Computers have programming, right? They have a design plan. So if, for example, I turned on my computer and instead of this screen popping up talking to you, all of a sudden my computer just went blue and nothing was on it, right? My computer wouldn't be functioning properly, right? So it would be malfunctioning. And so think of the design plan being kind of like a program, and the program working accordingly is proper function. And so the idea is that our minds need to be properly functioning. They need to have not only be properly functioning, but the programming needs to be successfully aimed at truth. It needs to be a programming that's not aimed at other things, like may say merely survival or wish fulfillment, right? No, it's aimed at the production of truth, at getting at reality. And there needs to be like a high statistical probability, at least, that the beliefs being produced under these conditions, that the belief will be true. So it's not the case that, maybe like there's an evil demon and he decides to create Tyler, and he wants me to have true beliefs. So he tries to make the programming of my mind aimed at truth, but he sucks, right? He's not Yahweh. And so, I only actually end up producing one true belief for every 100 beliefs I have, right? Well, that one true belief, that wouldn't be enough for my belief to be warranted, right? Because there's too much luck involved in the situation, right? So, and then it needs to be for the environment for which I was designed. It can't be a crazy environment. So those familiar with like Gideon examples, right, where an individual will have justified true belief, but will be in some crazy environment where meteorites strike cars or where fake barns are everywhere, right? It can't be sort of in an environment like that. It needs to be a normal environment for which you're designed for. So if you have those conditions, right, then and your belief is produced in light of these conditions, these constraints, then your belief will possess warrant. So a lot of philosophers think there actually aren't very good arguments for the existence of other minds, right? There's competing hypotheses, for example, such as maybe an evil demon created me and is giving me the illusion or hallucinations, or is making me think that there are other people around me when in fact there are none, right? Maybe I don't even have to go that far. Maybe I'm the only mind that exists, and my mind projects that people and things are around me in order to keep me company in this dark and lonely world. It's kind of like Freud's God projection, or maybe it's just my nature to project these things, So, and you might think that these hypotheses are simpler than actually postulating that there are 7+ billion minds, and maybe even more if we include extraterrestrial intelligent life, or different universes, right? Or so, you might think that these are actually, simpler. So a lot of people aren't super keen on the arguments that we currently have in the literature on other minds. And so no worries for the proper functionalist. For the proper functionalist, if I was designed to, you could say by God, by evolution, by both, if I was designed to produce the belief that other minds were around me, right, when I'm in the environment that's normal for that sort of belief, and my faculties are functioning properly and successfully aimed at truth, well then, hey, my belief that I find myself with would be warranted, even if I didn't have arguments, for that. And so that's what I take roughly. That's a sort of a very rough primer on what proper functionalism is all about.
Yeah. So to let someone or yourself to have a knowledge, you need to at least have those four things to be there. So it could be a warrant for our belief. Can I say that? Yeah, Tyler?
Yeah, it is in order for your belief to be warranted. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Okay. So talking
and real quick, and this is like, for example, how animals have knowledge, right? Animals don't have access to arguments, right? Their faculties aren't that complicated, right? They can't rationally reflect on evidence and on probability and so forth. They're not doing like Bayesian calculations and whatnot in their mind. But yet they still know stuff, right? And so whenever a dog, if I come home and I have a burger in a bag and my dog starts to get really excited and starts to put its nose in the bag trying to, get in there. I mean, the dog knows something, right? The dog knows, food there. Yummy there. Or if I have a ball in my hand, right? Ball there. And whenever I throw the ball, the dog runs toward the ball. The dog knows that the ball is over there now, right? So it's they know by way of cognitive proper function.
Yeah, and I could say that it is as if that it's just there, knowledge is just there, quote unquote, roughly speaking. Can I say it like that? Just conditions.
Right. Yeah, you don't have to even know the conditions are met in order for your belief to possess warrant.
Yeah, and I think it's also I think that proper functionalism is also a response to some of the skepticism toward knowledge, especially those who have strong conception what is justification. And I think I need to go there. That can I say that a proper function is also a response towards some ideas of theories of knowledge like internalism, classical condition, and evidentialism?
Yeah, so some people will understand proper functionalism as a theory of justification, right? Others will understand it not as a theory of justification, but just specifically a theory of warrant. That's how I like to think about it. So for justification, I endorse phenomenal conservatism, or at least my version, something very close to it. And this is what I take Plantinga to endorse actually as well, about justification. So I think that these aren't two competing theories, and that you can actually be an externalist about one and an internalist about another. Evidentialism, the thesis that you need evidence to support the belief. You can understand evidence very loosely to include, say, just experience, right? And so if you say like, contingently, we need the evidence of experience, right? Experience needs to accompany belief. Then proper functionalist can combine his theory with evidentialism, right? Of course, the proper functionalist isn't likely to think that it's a necessary truth, right? That more like it's just contingently so. Our design plan requires this sort of thing. But so it all depends on how, I guess, you define these theories about whether or not they're actually in competition with one another.
Yeah. I remembered what you're right in the religious epistemology and the Cambridge elements. Yeah. Okay, but how about internalism and classical conditionalism, Tyler? Maybe could you explain it a bit to
Sure.
us, and what's the relations?
Right. So, you might think that in order to know, maybe one of two things have to, conditions have to be met. One, the belief in question has to be such that you just can't be wrong about it, right? But if it's not, there's only so many beliefs that could even possibly fall into that category. I'm actually skeptical about any of our beliefs falling into this category. But even for those who think that there are such beliefs that fall into this category, it would be a small amount of beliefs, right? And so maybe you think that based off of those beliefs that you can't be wrong about, you can sort of stack other beliefs on top of it. And so if you can make sort of inferences, arguments based off of these foundational beliefs. And so if God isn't a belief that fits into the first box, right, this sort of incorrigible belief, well, then you're going to have an argument, right? You're going to have to make an argument. Your belief, if it's going to be rational or knowledge, it's going to have to come by way of inference. And so, this is roughly a picture of what the classical foundationalist thinks. I think this thinking, so few people right now, obviously this doesn't mean that classical foundationalism is false, but it is sort of a theory that had its peak back in the day. But my worries about it, I just don't see why my beliefs need to be, at least some of my beliefs need to be such that I can't be wrong about them, right? I just don't see that being sort of a necessary condition for knowledge. In fact, it just seems to me that my dog or me, when I look at something, I have some sort of sensation, right? Some sort of experience that leads me to believe something. And hey, if my faculties are functioning rightly and there's a high statistical probability that the belief being produced under such conditions is true, well then, hey, you know what? My belief, is warranted or whatnot. That seems enough for me. I don't need the other stuff, and I don't even need arguments. So I don't see, my intuitions aren't moved at all by this need for inference. But I also worry about, like, if you take the classical foundationalist picture, and if there are no good arguments for other minds, belief in other minds, or that you're not being deceived by an evil demon, or that the past existed, right? The past wasn't created 5 minutes ago, or your belief about the past isn't the result of the being created, the world being created 5 minutes ago with the appearance of age and memories, right? Or Hume's problem of induction, that the future will be like the past, right? I mean, you have all these sort of skeptical worries, right? That if there aren't good arguments for, then the classical foundationalist is going to have to say, we don't know. And I think that's super duper implausible. So I kind of take it first as a primary that we know stuff. And it's very obvious that we know stuff. So in this sense, I follow in the tradition of Thomas Reid, the common sense philosopher, who just like looks at people and his response to them is like, you got to be joking, right? I mean, obviously you know this, right? That's basically, if you read Reid, that's just what you get like throughout the whole thing. It's great. Yeah, so that it's a worry. And can we make sense of animals having knowledge on classical foundationalism? That's another worry. So yeah, I don't think that classical foundationalism has like sort of articulates necessary conditions for knowledge, for warrants, and I actually think that you can sort of run reductios with it. Of course, the most famous reductio is that it doesn't meet its own it doesn't meet its own criteria, because is classical foundationalism a basic belief, or is it based off of inference from a basic belief? And while it's true that Plantinga just kind of really rushed it, and he didn't really think of possible arguments that could be made for classical foundationalism as some sort of inference, I'm not too impressed that there are good arguments. I think the best case you have is John DePoe. I have a volume called, I'm actually reading it, just make sure I get the title rightly, Debating Christian Religious Epistemology. And in it, he gives a case for classical foundationalism. I think that's sort of the best case you can get, and I think it's interesting to think about. But ultimately, I don't think it works for the reasons that I've just articulated. And so, if there are no good arguments for classical foundationalism, right? And I respond to his arguments for classical foundationalism. If there are no good arguments for classical foundationalism, and classical foundationalism is not a basic belief, then I still have this kind of worry that there's no positive justification for the epistemic theory. So anyway, that's a very rough sketch of that.
Yeah, thank you. It gives us an understanding. So yeah, so we already spent like 30 minutes talking about this epistemology, proper functionalism, and so on. Now maybe I want to move on to the next topic. So we already talked about this technical stuff. And also the next one also still technical, see, but I mean like we're talking about this epistemology. Now I want to move on to the next topic, that is reform epistemology. So yeah, the question is, what is reform epistemology?
So again, reformed epistemology is just the thesis that religious belief, right, can be justified or warranted apart from argument. And so, as a proper functionalist, I would follow Plantinga and just make this move, right? Plantinga calls this the AC model after Aquinas and Calvin, because he thinks that they affirmed roughly what this model contains. And that is that, if God created in us a cognitive faculty, call it the sensus divinitatis, right? After Calvin in his Institutes, I believe, book 1. That, is Plantinga reads in Calvin that, is this faculty responsible for producing belief in God in his activities. Well, if we have this faculty, right, as far as we know, it could be the case that we do have this faculty, right? That's to say it's epistemically possible that we have this faculty. And if this faculty is functioning properly and aimed at truth and successfully so, and so on, well, then the belief that it produces about God and his activities would be warranted. So it would be, you could draw an analogy with other minds, right? In the same way that other minds is warranted, belief in God would be warranted. So then he specifically extends it, though. He doesn't stop there with just sort of basic theistic, imprecise, theistic belief. Right? He extends it to what he calls the extended AC model, to specifically talk about Christian belief. So, according to the Christian story, tradition has it that everything about us has been touched by sin, and that our sensus divinitatis, right, has been damaged by sin. Maybe it was such that we had certain graces that were lost before the fall that allowed us to know that God exists in a way that we know exactly that other minds exist, right? So the level of warrant, the degree of warrant for my belief that my wife exists, I would have that same degree of warrant, that same degree of confidence that, say, God existed, right? It would just be so completely and utterly obvious, and not just at particular times. So, for example, in my life, there's been certain times where it seems like the existence of God is that obvious, but it hasn't always been consistent at that particular level. And so the idea is that sin has affected our faculties. In fact, in some people, sin has damaged the faculty so much that perhaps it doesn't work at all, right? So it's not working optimally in all of us, but it's not even working at all in some of us, right? And so, but nonetheless, if the Holy Spirit exists, and if he comes, third person of the Trinity, starts to reverse the damages, right? Repair the damages of sin, as he sort of testifies to us about Holy Scripture, about the testimony of the gospel. So I'll take it that the gospel is roughly that Jesus died, was buried, and rose again on the third day in accordance with the scriptures, right? This is what St. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15. And so it's through the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ that the world can be made right? Those who participate in Christ's death and his resurrection will be forgiven of their sins, just as Christ was risen, they too will be risen. And so you want to be tied to Jesus and what he did, right? This is the gospel. And so this gospel message is a testimony, right? So you might think that if you open up the Bible again and you read it, you're reading testimony. And it's a special type of testimony, right? It's multiple testifiers involved. It's the Holy Spirit who's writing Holy Scripture, is one of the authors, at least according to Christian tradition. And it's obviously the authors, human authors, who wrote it as well. And so you have multiple testifiers going on. Plantinga calls it a special case of testimony. And if anyone has young children, I have five young children, and they believe anything you say. It's great. If I've said to my children, the moon was made of cheese, they would be like, oh, really? Oh, okay. Or there's a place called Australia, right? Or there's a place called Indonesia and it exists. And I'm going to be talking to people on it. Oh, really? Cool. Okay. Right. You have to learn not to accept everything, right? Like when you have to train your mind when you're watching politicians, at least in America, trust me, it's true. Probably everywhere else as well. But when you're watching politicians, you have to train yourself to know that politicians lie and you can't take everything verbatim. Like personally, me naturally, no matter what politician it is, I'm just like, oh, okay, it's true. And I'm like, wait, this is a politician speaking. You got to get, politicians and lawyers talk. You got to be you got to be more cautious. But generally, like part of our cognitive setup, part of our cognitive design plan is to accept testimony, and that's how we know bunches of our knowledge. But bunches of the propositions that we know is via testimony, right? Think about all the information we know from science and history, for example. Okay, so if the Spirit of God is testifying to us, maybe the Holy Spirit is testifying to us through Scripture. Maybe He's moving on us, instigating us to accept the truths of Scripture. We're accepting the testimony of the human authors, right? And we just sort of find ourselves believing this. And all of this is the product of properly functioning cognitive faculties successfully aimed at truth. If that's the case, then my belief would have warrant. My belief that Christianity is true, that this gospel message is true, right? That Jesus really did die and raise again for the forgiveness of my sins and the world's, would be warranted, even apart from argumentation. So I wouldn't need, say, Michael Okona's big giant volume, right? I love it. Michael Okona is a good friend of mine. We used to be colleagues. Or Bill Craig's, work defending the resurrection of Jesus. It's great. It might build your confidence. But if you already find yourself believing that Jesus rose from the dead, just because, the testimony of the Spirit, the testimony of your church, the testimony of whatever, it's actually not required, right? And so, so this is what I take to be the sort of his main 2 points, right? Applying his proper functionalism to general theistic belief and then to specifically Christian belief, and how theistic and Christian belief can be warranted apart from argument.
Yeah, thank you. But Tyler, I see recently some of people tried to do this reform epistemology to also their own traditions. I mean, like we once invited Jamie Turner. Have you ever heard about him? Jamie Turner to talk about Islamic reform.
Yeah. Jamie's a friend of mine.
Maybe,
yeah.
I mean, maybe I'm going to these questions first. Yeah.
Okay.
How does a reform epistemologist respond to the pluralities of religious understanding?
Yeah. Of what understanding? What was the last thing you said?
Pluralities of religious pluralism. I mean. Yeah.
Oh, pluralism. Okay, got it. Yeah, very good question. So, first off, you might think, well, whenever 2 people enter in a room and they seem like epistemic peers, that's to say, they're intellectually about on par, they've both read the material that's relevant to whatever they're going to be discussing. If they both disagree, what happens? What should happen? One theory says that, well, they should just refrain from believing anything that they're disagreeing on. And another version of this will say, well, maybe they don't have to refrain from the proposition in question that they're advocating, but their credence for it needs to sharply decline to match their epistemic peers' disagreement. So these different versions of something called conciliatory epistemology, right? The conciliatory view. And this contrasts the steadfast view, where it says, no, actually, you don't have to. You can remain steadfast in your belief, right? And I've never been tempted away from the steadfast view. There are various reasons why. So Plantinga gives a case where he talks about, let's say we're colleagues at work. We're working for the same place, and I come up to you and I say, "Hey, Samuel, I think it's totally cool to lie about my colleagues, including you, in order for me to advance in my career, in order for me to get recognized," right? And you respond back shocked, right? How could you? How could you think that? right? And then it begins an hour-long discussion where I'm giving all my arguments, you're giving all your arguments, and at the end of the day, no one's moved. Are you irrational for walking away from this conversation still holding to the belief that it's wrong to lie about your colleagues? No, of course not. Can you still know that that's wrong? Yes, absolutely. So epistemic disagreement doesn't necessitate that you have a defeater or that you need to decrease your credence. In fact, so as some have pointed out, what about like if we apply this to the conciliatory view, right? There are epistemic peers, right? There are people who've read all the literature about peer disagreement, but yet who come to two different views, at the end of the day. It would follow that on the conciliatory view that they should either suspend belief about conciliatory view or significantly decrease their credence about it. It doesn't seem always consistently applied. I mean, think about if we had that attitude toward the sciences, right? Quantum mechanics, realist views versus non-realist views, or theories of time, A theory versus B theory, or politics, right? Does capitalism work or not, right? I mean, we just need to remain agnostic or decrease all of our credences about like everything, right? Everything that's interesting. And so it doesn't seem plausible. And of course, you can also just deny that the person's like an epistemic peer. And just think that, well, my faculties have been repaired by the Holy Spirit. Yours hasn't, right? So, I'm fine. In this book right here, Plantingian Religious Epistemology and World Religions, we go through and sort of say, hey, if your religious tradition can't make sense of having properly functioning faculties, which we think God is ultimately required to make sense of this condition, right? So you have atheist proper functionalists, of course, in the literature, but they think that you can sort of make sense of design plan talk by natural selection or by prior history, right? When we go through and we say these accounts don't work, right? We follow Plantinga's criticisms and we give a little bit of our own, and so these don't work. So what we're really going to need is a designer of our faculties, or at least something like a designer, right? Maybe we can't univocally predicate God designer, but analogically we can talk about God being a designer of our faculties. Right. If that's the case, then obviously religious traditions that can't make sense of a personal God, even if you understand personal analogically, right? So God's not personal in the same way that we are personal, right? But nonetheless, when we talk about God being personal, there's not an equivocation that's going on, right? We have a rough approximate understanding. It's in between equivocation and univocal. At least something like that. Can you at least have that? Can the religious tradition offer up that at least? And traditionally, Buddhist traditions haven't. Traditionally, it's not understood that Shankara in his Advaita Vedanta Hinduism, right, was advocating for something like this. Traditionally, it's understood that Brahman is the impersonal all, the propertyless and qualityless Brahman. So you obviously atheism would fall into this category too, wouldn't have something like this. And then you might also think that, well, not only do you need to make sense of proper function or design plans, right? If your worldview says that there are no such things ultimately, at the ultimate level, there's no such things as properly functioning faculties, right? There's no such things as minds, at least separate, distinct minds. Well, then you're going to have a problem as well. And then there are different features as well. Like with Islam, for example, we talk about how in the more orthodox traditions within Islam and the philosophical traditions, usually there's this kind of internalist requirement, this KK or JJ thesis that's required. And, you have to test the Quran. Like the idea is kind of like we're we're inclined to believe in God, but then we're going to have doubts, but we're supposed to respond to these doubts positively by testing the Quran and, coming to have evidence that Islam is true. So it's a little bit of a different epistemic position than the one that I painted out earlier with Christian belief. Jamie has responded actually in a paper that I still need to respond to. Me and Eric still need to respond to. I really love Jamie's paper. I think he's a really, really sharp thinker, but I'm going to end up disagreeing with him. Friendly disagreement with him on that paper. But he's really an up and coming philosopher to pay attention to. He's doing some really interesting work with Islam. But yeah, so I guess what I would say, long story short, there are only so many religious traditions that can pull the same sort of move that Plantinga is pulling. That sort of, if the idea is that you need certain tools, if you need certain certain preconditions that need to be made intelligible, it requires theism, and it requires diversity, and it requires faculties that aren't plagued by Maya. Then yeah, you're only so many religious traditions are going to be able to make intelligible these preconditions and so on. So
yeah, okay, thank you. So first one, it's not a problem sometimes to be disagree with. I mean, in the condition of in epistemic disagreement doesn't make it a defeater for us to believe in our own traditions, in God. And second, that maybe a lot of traditions could try to use proper functionalism as their try to use proper functionalism for their own traditions. But the problem is, if they don't have the idea of that some kind of Judeo-Christian God, it's a problem for them. Can I say it like that, Hello?
Yeah, right, exactly.
Okay, sure. That's the idea of. Now I want to go again. If that's about other religions, how about atheism? Can I say that in RE is theism is a default position, and if it is true, then what about the atheist?
Right. So you might think, well, if God designed all of us and designed all of us with this SD, right, with this sense of divinity, then we're all going to kind of naturally believe that God exists. In which then you might say, oh, well, sin though, and sin has has messed up our faculties, and some people won't believe at all because because their faculty has been damaged. So maybe they never have this sort of natural inclination to theism. But what's interesting is that according to cognitive science of religion, the paradigm view is that religious belief is natural. Belief in the supernatural is natural to our faculties. And I can explain more why that's the case. Would you like me to do that now or in the next question?
Yeah, maybe it's okay. Just okay. Yeah, in CSR, it's in CSR. It is natural for us to believe in God, but
right.
Some people like that. And some other are you just believe, and there's nothing special about it. So yeah.
Yeah, so you cut out there for a minute. Did you say Daniel Dennett and some others will sort of explain away religious belief merely by postulating cognitive science and sort of debunk it in that sense? Yeah. Right. Yeah, so teleology is natural to us. So Deborah Kilman has done various studies, right? And some of these studies asked questions to children. Questions like, why are rocks pointy? And they would respond like, rocks are pointy, so animals won't sit on them. Right? Obviously, it's like a teleological, purposeful explanation. Well, it turns out that it's not just children. Adults who are educated in, who are uneducated in the sciences also prefer teleological explanations to explaining various natural phenomena. even educated adults, when educated adults were asked these questions, at first they wouldn't prefer teleological explanations, but once you press them to try to make them answer very quickly, they more naturally again started to prefer teleological explanations. And we see that we naturally perceive purpose, design, or teleology, not just this. These studies aren't just done in America. They're also done in other places in the West, in the UK, Scandinavia, and even in China. There's a really good volume about this, actually. They basically replicated a lot of these sort of studies in China. Same sort of intuitions, right? So we can't just say, well, this is just because, Judeo-Christian culture was influenced Western society, and this is just how Westerners think, but not how we naturally think, right? So it kind of put an end to that sort of debate. And one explanation for kind of why we sense design, why we sense other agents, is this idea that we have a hyper agency detection device. Call it a HAD. So the idea is that, given natural selection, an organism that senses agency much more than, say, this other organism over here is likely going to survive, right? It's going to get to have more food, going to survive, going to be better off than the other organism who is not able to, become aware of agency enough. And so throw that in with a sort of a theory of mind, and you sort of have this explanation for why, when you're out in the forest and you pick up a flower and you look all of its delicacies, you start finding your self-belief that God designed this, right? Or you're outside and you see the ocean waves crash into the rocks, and you just find yourself believing, that God is powerful. Or you look at the starry sky on a beautiful night, and you just find yourself believing that God, he created all of this, right? Or that some being did, or however you want to hash it. But and so it turns out that religious belief in supernatural, belief in divinity, gods, etc., it's natural to us, right? While atheism, it doesn't actually seem to be so natural. Kelly James Clark has done a lot of good work in this area.
We once invited him, actually.
Okay, yeah? Yeah, I'm a fan of his. Kelly James Clark has done work to sort of suggest, I'm trying to remember all the contributors to the studies and so forth, like Cohen, that he references, but he suggests that what could be the correlation, or that there is a correlation between those who are atheists and those who are higher on the spectrum for autism, right? So there is a correlation. You have a better shot there's more likely of a chance that you're going to be an atheist the higher you are on the autism spectrum. This, of course, is not to say that all atheists are high on the spectrum for autism, or that all atheists are autistic. Nothing like that at all. But there is a correlation between, you have a more likely shot to be an atheist if you are higher on the scale for autism, right? And so, some question, well, why could that be the case? So Kelly and some others, they propose, people who are higher on the scale for autism, such as myself, oftentimes they have a hard time understanding other minds, right, around them, right, reading the room, so to speak, right, understanding intentions and the mood, and so maybe it's the same way, right? Maybe we have atheists who are high on the scale for autism kind of have a hard time reading the room, reading the environment, reading design around them, right? Reading that there are agents, right, around them, reading the mind. The theory of mind's not there. And so Yeah, something like that is roughly what Kelly James Clark. I haven't I defended that work in my own writing, so I don't know it as well as might be slaughtering it slightly. But that's roughly the idea. If you Google a talk by him, you can see that. So there's some evidence to suggest that atheism's sort of not natural to properly functioning cognitive faculties. Yeah. So at the end of the day, though, again, I don't think atheism as a tradition is going to be able to make sense of properly functioning cognitive faculties aimed at producing true beliefs. All right, you have Plantinga's evolutionary argument against naturalism that one wonders about if we could trust our cognitive faculties on if they reflect on naturalism and evolution together. And then obviously, I don't think proper function will make sense in this worldview as well. I don't think the naturalistic accounts work. So no real need to worry anyway. That's how I would respond.
Yeah, thank you, Taylor. So yeah, so it is better for us to say that CSR, instead of a justified atheism, I could say, quote unquote, it gives the idea that actually CSR shows that theism is a more natural than atheism.
Right. Yeah. So the whole thing, like, that new atheists will give, right? That, like, we're all born atheists and you have to be taught religion. It's just to quote a former president, it's all fake news.
Okay, thank you, Tyler. So maybe this is the last questions from the discussion. Maybe later there's some questions from the audience, but if we want to try to understand religious epistemology and reform epistemology, do you have any book recommendations other than your book? I think,
of course, I recommend,
yeah, I have it. Like,
besides recommending this and my other books, Alvin Plantinga, Warranted Christian Belief is just a must. I mean, it's like, if you put me on a desert island with, like, the Bible and you only gave me two other books, I would choose Warranted Christian Belief and probably the Summa Theologica, right? I mean, those are probably the two books I'd take with me. Like, with the Summa, it's kind of cheating, right? Because it's not just one book; it's like more material. But I think it's super important. It's paradigm shifting. It really changed the direction of the field. And so, John Greco has a new book out on testimony, and I think it's really helpful. He I believe he applies it to religious belief. Yes, he does. Yeah, sorry, I had to jog my memory. It's been like 6 or 7 months since I've read it. So and this is kind of a bit of a new focus. The field is kind of really now turned to really addressing testimony. And making sense of how testimony can transmit knowledge, and he applies it to religious belief. So that would be another really good book if you're really looking for, like, cutting edge, very new stuff on religious epistemology. Look at testimony and some of Greco's work with that. So much. I mean, if you look at anything from the contributors from the 5 Views book. Any of the contributors, just look up their papers. I would suggest that. Andrew Moon has a fantastic paper. He's a good friend of mine, and he's a great philosopher. He has a paper on cognitive science and circular reasoning and debunking arguments. It's absolutely fantastic. It's one of my favorite papers that I have read in the recent years. Kenny Boyce, anything from Kenny Boyce and Andrew Moon on epistemology is solid. Michael Berkman, obviously, as well. So
the Justification Without Awareness, I think it's a great book.
Yeah. And he's got a new book coming out on the 1st, responding to skepticism.
I see. Yeah. Okay, sure. Thank you, Tyler. I noted out. And maybe I'll give this as the recommendation for the participants. And I guess my friend here want to ask something. Hendra, do you want to ask something?
Yes, I have a question. Hi, Tyler. Nice to meet you. My name is Hendra. Yeah. I have read your book, Religious Epistemology, and you point out about epistemic environment condition. But I think you don't quite explain what you mean about epistemic environment conditions.
Right.
So can you explain to us?
Sure. Yeah. So, going back earlier, as I mentioned, the Gideon cases, I think help make this condition plausible. The fake barn case is a famous Gideon case where, you're driving in the Midwest in America to a town in Wisconsin where they're tricky. All right, this town, they're tricksters, and they decide to put up a whole bunch of fake barns. So in the Midwest, if you're ever in America in the Midwest, perhaps you'll see a lot of barns, a lot of cornfields. But these Wisconsinites they decide that we're going to tear down our real barns and we're going to put up a whole bunch of fake replicas of barns. They're going to look really real, at least from one vantage point, right? You imagine Looney Tunes. Whenever Roadrunner is, the Wiley, the coyote is chasing him, and maybe there's like a tunnel, but it looks like a tunnel from this point of view, but it turns out just to be a brick wall, right? So they put up a whole bunch of fake barns everywhere, and you're driving through. You don't know this. You think this is a normal town where you expect to see real barns. And everywhere you could go, except maybe for a couple places, say you're in this direction. If you go here, you'd run into a fake barn. Here, you'd run into a fake barn. Here, a fake barn. There, a fake barn. Everywhere, a fake barn, right? But let's say, like, behind you this way, there actually is a real barn, and you just wonder, I want to explore this town. Where am I going to go? And let's say you happen to go this way. Right, you go to the place where there's an actual real barn, and you go, and you have an experience. Right, you're being appeared to barnly. Right, you have a strong experience, a seeming of a barn. You form the belief there's a barn. Right, you would have had the same exact experience if you would have walked up to the fake barns, but you got lucky. And what did we mention earlier? You have enough luck in this situation. Then it will dissolve the knowledge. And so in this case, the environment is really tricky. You're not designed for environments where people decide to put up a whole bunch of barn facades. And so here, I take it that this sort of scenario can help elucidate and make a bit of sense of the environment condition, right? It can't be sort of tricky environments. It's got to be environments for, how we were designed to operate in.
Okay. Maybe can I give a follow-up question, Tyler? What if we take it to the context of religious belief? I mean, what kind of environment that make our religious belief maybe or religious knowledge is not warranted?
Right. So I think this is a good question. So it was really interesting. During my PhD, I did my PhD at the University of Glasgow. And during my PhD, I would work really hard. I'd work without lights in a dark room by myself with, I don't know, the same Lana Del Rey album or Ellie Goulding album playing as I, for hours at a time, right, typed up my dissertation. And then, sometimes I get a little bit of a break. I'd go out and go into my department and I'd see other people, interact with them. But usually when I saw them or interacted with them, we were kind of debating or talking about, research. And sometimes, like, I was just so away from nature that it kind of almost shocked me that we would take trips on occasion, little family trips, to places that were more out in nature, more up north. And as soon as I got out, I was like, look at the streams and the mountains and the sheep, and all of a sudden I just overwhelming sensation that, God created this, right? Or picking up some delicate flower, God created this. You just find yourself with this natural propensity to believe this sort of thing. Or when I would come home, from work after a really hard day, debating people and writing responses to people, and coming home, and my kids would run up to me and say, "Daddy," and they'd run to my arms or grab my legs. I would just sort of find myself believing that God exists and He loves me very much. Or church. I tell friends who are considering Catholicism, get yourself in the right epistemic environment, right? Actually go to liturgy, right? Go to mass, and see if there's something in the environment that sort of triggers, right, belief. So these are all ways in how environments, I think, can trigger in us certain things.
Okay, thank you. Hendra, you want to add to give a follow-up questions? Thank you, Tyler.
Yeah, thank you, Tyler. I have a second question. Is there a role of arguments for warrant decree? I ask it because on your books, you said that for a proper functionalist, the degree of warrant that a belief possesses depends on how firmly one holds to a proposition. So my question is there a role for argument?
Right. Yeah, there very well could be. So, I mean, it might be such that our design plan requires arguments in order to be rational in holding a proposition, right? So you might think, like, in reference to the correct theory of warrant, we actually do need arguments in order to rationally believe that proper functionalism is better than, some other theory. But even if the design plan is such that we don't have to have arguments, right? We can believe just based off of impulses that we gain from the environment that trigger certain experiences that are all the result of properly functioning faculties. Our credence might be like, I don't know, 0.8. But then you throw in our contingency arguments, or again, showing my Catholic side, Aquinas's, first way, right? You throw in some Swinburne, his inductive arguments, and then all of a sudden, like, your confidence even grows, right? Your credence grows, and so arguments can help increase our confidence, can help increase the degree of warrant that we have. But of course, sometimes they don't really even help much at all. Like, there might be certain times where, like I said earlier, I find myself believing that God exists with the same sort of degree of psychological certainty that I believe that my wife exists. Arguments aren't going to do too much for me here. So the degree of confidence that you have, basically, if it's not psychologically certain all the time, then it seems like arguments can be of aid there. And obviously, if it is psychologically certain, then arguments aren't going to help you too much outside of maybe evangelism reasons. So as a Christian, I believe it's my job to share the gospel to other people who aren't Christians. And if I'm just like, well, it just seems obvious to me that Christianity is true, that's not going to be of much help. Maybe announcing the gospel, right? There's power in the gospel, according to my tradition, that the Holy Spirit will use that in work and convert souls. But I might get a lot better results or a lot better conversations going off if I use arguments.
Okay. Thank you, Tyler. Yeah.
Okay. Is there any questions more? I personally have a more personal question. I mean, I'm currently writing my graduate thesis, also I'm going to continue my writing on planting, and actually that's what I want to try to do. I have a personal interest in liturgy. Back then, I read James K. Smith. If you ever heard his name, James K. Smith.
No, I don't think so.
Oh yeah, he's a reform and he writing about liturgy, but after I read James K. Smith's work, I read other writings from philosophers like Walter Storff and Cuneo. They wrote about liturgy, and I think I could say that I could put this idea of liturgy, and I think it could play a big important part in talking about this reform epistemology, in my opinion. I don't know. What do you think, Tyler?
Yeah, absolutely. So recently I was asked to contribute a chapter in a book published by Palgrave coming out on Eastern Christian philosophy. And in the chapter that I'm supposed to have already, be writing right now, we'll be talking a little bit of like an Eastern Christian, divine liturgy and the emphasis on divine liturgy, and how that can sort of bring about religious experiments and experiences. And Plantinga talks about how different religious traditions might have different glossings of his extended AC model, right? Might be a different way to express it in a Wesleyan tradition or a Catholic or Eastern Catholic or Orthodox tradition. And so, I think that could absolutely make for a good glossing, so to speak, of the extended AC model.
I see. Yeah. Okay. Just popped into my mind because my grad study quite. Yeah. Okay. So any more questions from kalian? Ada pertanyaan teman-teman? If you have any questions, just to put it in the chat box. Yeah, so for the context, I don't think a lot of people actually try to think too much about Plantinga in Indonesia. And Hendra, me, and some of our friends try to disseminate this Plantinga religious epistemology in Indonesia, and we have a great interest in Plantinga religious epistemology.
Yes.
That's what
Saint Alvin, the first non-Catholic saint, to be canonized.
Okay. Thank you, Tyler. I think there's no more questions. Once again, thank you so much, Tyler. It's really fun to talk with you, and I really hope maybe there's another opportunities for us to talk with you again. Another
sure
time.
And maybe next time I'll actually be in my home in Macau, and we won't be that. What's the time difference between Macau and Indonesia?
I think it's West Indonesia. I think it's an hour.
An hour. Okay.
An hour, 2 hours.
Yeah.
Not too
all
far.
Right. Well, thank you very much, and all of y'all have a great time.
Thank you for spending your night to talk about Reform epistemology in this hub, Tyler.
Well, thanks for spending your morning. Have a great rest of the day.
Yeah, I'll see you again. Have a great day, Tyler.
And if you haven't, you could get this for others who are watching this. Selfish promotion. Yeah.
It's okay.
All right. Take care.
I'll see you again. Bye. Oke, jadi teman-teman, demikian sesi kita hari ini. Kita ketemu lagi di lain waktu. Terima kasih untuk waktunya dan terima kasih sudah menghabiskan waktu bersama sekolah.